It's Tuesday, the 3rd of October. My name's Juan Brown. You're watching the Blanco Lario channel. And October has gotten off to a very rough start with no less than 7 fatalities in 3 separate accidents on Sunday, the 1st of October alone. Let's check it out. First up is the Cherokee 140 out of Moab, Utah. This involved the North Dakota state senator and his entire family while attempting a night departure out of Moab while conducting a fuel stop as he was doing a long cross country from Scottsdale to Moab and then from Moab to home in North Dakota. The airport at Moab, Canyonlands Regional Airport, is located just north of town here at the 4,579-foot elevation, and the area is, I would call it mountainous, surrounded with some higher terrain. The initial reports indicate that the accident site was located just over here at the south end of Arches National Park in elevations of about 5,000 to 6,000 feet. If you're familiar with the terrain around the Moab area, taking a look off of the end of the runway, looking to the south here, get back on the highway. There's the Gemini Bridges and the high terrain to the right. Here's the La Salle Mountains off in the distance to the left. Moab is located down in here, and Arches National Park up and to the left here. But you are in a bit of a bowl. They departed at 8:30 at night. A 90% moon was rising just above the horizon at about the time that they departed. The weather was VFR. The Cherokee 140 with the 180 horse Lycoming engine and 4 folks on board and full fuel would be close to its gross weight, but was probably not exceeded. But still, the performance of this aircraft at that elevation is not the best. Investigators will be looking at the experience level of the pilot, Doug Larson, and his ratings. This would have been a pretty long cross country in a Cherokee 140 from Scottsdale up to Moab. That would have been 2.5 hour, maybe 3 hour long flight, and then to turn around and continue for a second leg. All in all, flying single engine at night in the mountains, VFR is just stacking the odds with your entire family, is just stacking too many odds against you. And if you're flying this VFR and not IFR at night, it's hard to tell exactly where the terrain is at all times. So investigators will be looking at to see, was this a simple case of CFIT, controlled flight into terrain, or was this a case of spatial disorientation, very easy to do at night in this dark canyonland country, even with the moon coming up? Or was there something wrong with the aircraft? Investigators should be able to figure all this out. And I mentioned spatial disorientation because at night, if you are simply a VFR private pilot without an instrument rating, or even if you have an instrument rating or not very proficient at it, night flying in the mountains at night can be very disorienting, and you will need to rely on your instruments to help you stay upright. Also on Sunday, the aviation community was stunned by this statement from AOPA. Richard McSpadden Jr., Senior Vice President of the AOPA Air Safety Institute, was one of 2 people killed in an aircraft accident on October 1st in Lake Placid, New York. We are deeply saddened to report that Richard McSpadden died in an aircraft accident outside of Lake Placid, New York on Sunday afternoon. The Cessna 177 Cardinal, in which Richard was in the right seat, experienced an emergency after takeoff. The airplane attempted to return to the airport but failed to make the runway. Both occupants lost their lives. Richard was a very accomplished pilot, including serving as the commander of the U.S. Air Force Thunderbirds. This one was a shocker. As Vice President of the Air Safety Institute here at AOPA, Richard was instrumental in putting out an excellent series of informational and instructional videos on behalf of AOPA, and about a year ago started this early analysis series of videos, kind of similar to what I do here on the Blanco Lario channel, where he would just explain the facts as we knew them fairly soon after an accident occurred, and his last video was on the midair up at Reno. Also at Oshkosh, he gave a great dissertation on the impossible turn, or why the impossible turn returning back to the airfield is such a dangerous maneuver, and apparently was the maneuver in which this accident happened. Now, Richard was in the right seat, and this was a Cessna 177 Cardinal. In the left seat was a 70-year-old former NFL player and owner of the aircraft, and who had recently purchased an air tour operation there at Lake Placid. The Cessna 177 Cardinal is different from other Cessnas, four-seat Cessnas, in that it has a laminar flow wing more similar to that of a Cessna 210 than that of a 172. So it's a higher performance wing. It's a more slippery wing with a slightly higher stall speed. But the 177 Cardinal makes a great camera ship platform, which was what they were doing. They were going to go take pictures of the AOPA Bonanza air-to-air pictures, and the Cardinal, with its cantilever laminar flow wing, has no struts and big doors and big picture windows that you can shoot pictures out of. But Richard was in the right seat, so that puts the PIC presumably in the left seat. So that begs the question, what was the takeoff briefing for this takeoff? And that begs the question for all of us, how do we conduct ourselves when we jump in other people's aircraft? Or what are we going to do in the event of an emergency? If you have somebody with more experience than somebody else, maybe the owner of the aircraft, it's his local airport, he's familiar with the local procedures, but you're the more experienced guy in the right seat. If something happens, who's going to do what? Is this something we should consider adding to our takeoff briefing? And as far as this 180-degree return to the airport stuff goes, I've been banging this horse for a long time on this channel. I say don't do it. Go straight ahead. Let's look and see what the book says. Here's the POH for a 1977 Cardinal. Engine failure immediately after takeoff. They give you an airspeed to shoot for, 70 knots indicated airspeed, and a laundry list of things to turn off. But if you go down here to amplified procedures under engine failures, paragraph 2, prompt lowering of the nose to maintain airspeed and establish a glide attitude is the first response to an engine failure after takeoff. In most cases, the landing should be planned straight ahead with only small changes in direction to avoid obstructions. Altitude and airspeed are seldom sufficient to execute a 180-degree gliding turn necessary to return to the runway. The checklist procedures assume that adequate time exists to secure the fuel and ignition systems prior to touchdown. Go straight ahead. There's so much nonsense here on YouTube and social media about people attempting this 180-degree turn back to the airport. I've lost so many friends in these and so many accidents to this attempted maneuver. My friend Bear Smith, years ago, a former Navy Blue Angel pilot, flying a decathlon, practicing this maneuver at Oroville years ago, lost his life in a stall spin just practicing the maneuver to try to return to the airport following an engine failure on takeoff. Go straight ahead. Unfortunately, here at Lake Placid Airport, the accident aircraft was found right here in this rather steep bluff off the end of this runway. It's about a 4,000-foot long runway, trying to make it back to the airport. And here at the Lake Placid News, they show the aircraft off the end of the runway as they were attempting to return to the runway, going in that direction. Looks like the back of the aircraft is scorpioned over a bit. We don't know if this was a stall spin or if they simply ended up short. At this point, it doesn't matter. The return to the airport did not work out. Now here's an excellent interview, an example of a pilot who chose to go straight ahead after his engine failed in his Cessna 210 and stuffed it in the trees and lived to tell about it. Here on Scott Perdue's Flywire channel, just posted a few days ago or a day ago. Check out this guy's description, this pilot's description of the pitch that is required once you lose an engine. Because once you lose an engine on takeoff, even if you've been practicing at idle RPM, and the amount of drag that you're going to have from a dead engine and a dead prop or a windmilling propeller is substantially more than that of an idling aircraft. Check this out.
Make a decision real quick and looked where I was. I knew I wasn't going to be high enough to do anything. I started looking for a place to land, but I pitched down right away. but I got the airspeed where I needed it to be, about 80 miles an hour on the indicated, was my glide. And I was very surprised with the pitch at that time. It felt like I was literally pointing towards the ground. It was stunning. And I can totally understand how people get into that mode of holding that thing off, trying not to bring it in, because it felt like I was literally pushing it down to the ground. But that's where the airspeed had to be. There was just no other option. I didn't real it was heavily wooded area. There was no real big openings. I saw an opening, but as I pitched for airspeed and figured out what I was getting out of that, I knew I wasn't going to make that. And
Remember, you cannot stall an aircraft at 0 G. If you need to push over hard enough to maintain airspeed to obtain 0 G, you're not going to stall that aircraft. And you got to get that pitch down and resist that natural human instinct to pull back. Lake Placid's airport, much like my airport right here in Nevada County, is surrounded by trees, but there are a couple of fields, and it looks like this golf course would have been a fine choice off the end of the runway, not located too very far off of the end of the runway right there. But more likely than not, it may very well have been the owner of the aircraft in the left seat that was doing the flying of the aircraft that may have initiated a turn back to the airport before anybody else could do anything or make another decision, committing them to a return to the airport. That we'll probably never know. Then finally, also on Sunday, the Big Tire pilot community was stunned at the news that Dooley Vanyo lost his life in his silver Carbon Cub while doing some recreational backcountry flying near Stehekin, Washington. Dooley had returned recently from one of his Alaska adventures where he'd been moose hunting and having a great time, and then was working his way back down towards Arizona area, was enjoying some backcountry flying with another pilot up there in the mountains near Stehekin, Washington. They were attempting a landing spot at about the 3,500 foot elevation on a ridgetop landing. These are just landing spots on BLM land, government land. They're off airport landings. This was a rather steep approach, typical ridgetop landing with, once you get committed on many of these sort of backcountry airstrips, you have little or no go-around option. But at the last minute, Dooley elected to go around, and in the go-around, banged his landing gear on a rock outcropping, banged it so hard that it apparently broke the landing gear. As Dooley went over the ridge, the other pilot who was on the ground at the time and talking to him on the radio heard that Dooley said that he was having some major problems and that he broke his landing gear, and Dooley ended up crashing about another mile to a mile and a half beyond the ridge top. Here's a picture of the experimental home-built Carbon Cub that Dooley was flying with the big tires on it. His dog Rusty was not on board the aircraft at the time of the accident, and what investigators will be looking at is, from looking at pictures of the accident scene, both landing gear still on the aircraft, but they appeared to be askew. And investigators will be looking at this connection, the connection right here where the landing gear attaches to the wing strut. Was that compromised, and did that cause a structural failure of the aircraft after he hit the gear on the rocks during the go-around? Dooley was quite a character. He had quite a checkered past. He took a lot of risks in his flying. He did not feel that all the rules always applied to him. We do not need to take these sort of risks in our recreational flying. Thank you so much for your support of this channel, especially the folks over on Patreon that make this content possible. See you here.